Jesus took bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to his disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many." It sometimes astonishes Westerners to learn that Christianity flourished in India when Europe was still a barbarian fringe on the Roman Empire, and that today in India, the homeland of Hinduism and Buddhism, there are more practicing Christians than in all of the Scandinavian countries combined. Of the religions of India, Christianity is the third largest after Hinduism and Islam. But as we can see from this chart, that is still a scant 2.5% of the total population of India. Christians exist in all of the states of India, but are concentrated for the most part in the south. In Kerala, for instance, 1/5 of the population is Christian. In Goa, until 1962, a Portuguese colony, there are largely Roman Catholics, and numerous Protestants exist in Tamil Nadu, in Andhra, in Bihar, and Assam. The oldest Christian traditions are those of the Syrian Christians, who claim a heritage to the Apostle Thomas and the very first generation of Christianity. Various legends tell how and why Thomas left the Mediterranean for the Malabar coast, the southwest coast of India, eventually to become a martyr somewhere in South India. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that King Alfred in 884 sent gifts to the tomb. And we have also the late 13th century accounts of Marco Polo, who visited the tomb and described Christian pilgrims there. But it is in the 6th century Alexandrian monk Cosmos Indicopleustes that we have the first reliable evidence. And he writes in his Christian topography of well-established churches in South India and Ceylon, with priests and monks under the jurisdiction of a Persian bishop. This indicates that the Christians of South India were Syrian Christians, that is, part of the far-flung eastern branch of Christianity, including the Nestorians, who used the Syriac language in their liturgies. Syrian Christians today are thus a unique result of communities that had limited contacts with their Near Eastern and Mediterranean origins and were molded for over 1,000 years in a Hindu environment before their first contacts with and influences from European Christians in the 16th century. The largest group today is the Jacobite, or Syrian Orthodox tradition, under the administration of the Catholicos of the East in Kottayam, Kerala. While bishops remain celibate, priests may marry, as this young priest shown here with his family. Syrian Orthodox services, such as this we are about to see, are now conducted in the vernacular of Kerala, Malayalam, rather than in the ancient Syriac. The change from Syriac liturgy came recently, in the 1960s, about the time the Roman Church changed from the ancient Latin to the vernaculars of the Catholic world. The Eucharist, or Holy Communion, is the focal point of each Sunday service, which may last 2 hours or more. Lay members are required to partake of the elements at least 3 times a year. Worshippers participate actively, especially in the powerful singing of responses in the early parts of the service. Involved here in the sanctuary are an ordained priest and several deacons. They are separated from the congregation in the nave of the church by a great curtain that is closed during the consecration of the host but opened as these elements, the sacrificed bread and wine, are brought forth to the congregation, which then celebrates the death, resurrection, and incorporation of Jesus Christ. The great festivals of the church take place at Easter, on Good or Sorrowful Friday, and at Christmas, with several minor and local festivals beside. Often, as in Hinduism, there are festival processions from the church through the local streets with musicians, elephants, fireworks, and colorful displays. Sometimes Hindus take part, just as Christians participate in major Hindu festivals. Several life cycle rites, from pre-birth ceremonies to rites after death, are performed by Syrian Christians in the general Hindu pattern. Exceptions, however, are baptisms by water that take place in the church, marriages arranged in traditional Indian fashion that occur in the church and involve the tying of a tiny gold pendant around the bride's neck by the bridegroom, and burials in a consecrated family plot of the cemetery. In their Hindu environment, Syrian Christian communities developed into caste groups in villages and towns, and full participants in the traditional class and caste system with its ritual purity and pollution scales and the exclusion of untouchables. In the social hierarchy of traditional Kerala, Christians became large and influential castes with power and prestige second only to the Brahmanas. In modern South India, caste exclusiveness is not always strictly followed, but intermarriage, even with Christians of other denominations, is still a rarity for Syrian Christians. Separate churches and cemeteries for low-caste Christians still exist. This long-time accommodation to the indigenous social structure meant that Hindus always knew what to do with these religious communities, with their strange crosses and Syriac books. In fact, if there was oppression of Syrian Christians, it came not from Hindus but from European Christians, who looked upon the Malabar Christians as heretics rather than brethren. Domination in the mid-16th century by Portuguese Roman Catholics resulted in the suppression and partial destruction of the Syriac liturgy, Latinization of rites and festivals, and imposed celibacy on the clergy, and the transformation of Hinduized church architecture to European styles. Not all of these changes were permanent, as the Portuguese authority gave way in the 17th century to successive Dutch and British Protestant powers, but the splintering of the Syrian community into separate churches has lasted to the present day. In addition to the Jacobite or Orthodox Church, there is the community of Syrian Catholics, who are ecclesiastically under the Pope in Rome, but are culturally distinct from the Catholics of Latin origin. In more recent history, several denominations have arisen under the influence of Anglican and other Protestant missionary movements. The Mar Thoma, or St. Thomas Syrian Church, began in the 1880s as an attempted reform movement. Throughout the modern period, Syrian Christians have been instrumental in founding educational, medical, and cultural institutions in their communities, and in all parts of India. In fact, Kerala has by far the highest literacy rate of any state in India, and Syrian Christians are proud of their roles in literature, journalism, and education. We have mentioned the changes brought about in the ancient Syrian community by contacts with European Christians. We must imagine ourselves in the mind of the late medieval period, in the adventurous age of exploration, when India, a land thought to lie somewhere beyond Egypt and Ethiopia, was a realm of wonders and wealth, a land where gigantic ants mined gold for the people, where pebbles gave light and the fountain of youth flowed, and where there lived a fabulous Christian emperor named Prester John, Prester John was variously located in Central Asia, India, or Ethiopia, and his aid was sought in the crown-sponsored ventures of the 15th century in the dual mission of the time: one, to gain wealth, and two, to advance Christendom. Essentially the same two goals obtained for the earlier Muslim expansion, so that now the two great religious imperialisms of the age, Islam and Christianity, converged upon South Asia. Portugal and Spain, with the aid of a Spanish pope in Rome, were carving up between them their new discoveries east and west. The Portuguese came east, one overland explorer reaching the Malabar coast by means of Muslim merchant ships in a 3-year journey from 1487 to 1490, the uppermost route on this map. And in 1497 to 98, Vasco da Gama managed the sea route around Africa and then across the Indian Ocean with the aid of an Indian navigator, the lower route upon this map. There were no gold mining ants and no Prester John, but there was India, and Roman Catholic missions were soon established. Much of the history of Christianity may be found in the first European church to be built in India in 1516, here in Cochin. Vasco da Gama was buried in this church in 1524. Then later, in the Dutch period, it became used by the Reformed Church, and from 1804 by the Anglicans during the British period. Now it is used by the Protestants of the Church of South India. While we are in Cochin, we might mention the Jewish community there. This active synagogue was built in 1568 by Jews who claim a heritage in the 1st century AD, when they arrived in India after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. Gravestones in the cemeteries attest to their wider habitation of southwest India, with names like Abraham, Solomon, and Joseph combined with Indian village names. The tiny Cochin community is of Malayalam speakers, while equally ancient Marathi-speaking Jewish communities exist in western India. Among the early Christian religious orders to be established in India were the Dominicans and Jesuits. The famed Jesuit Francis Xavier arrived in 1542, translated the Apostles' Creed and Lord's Prayer to Tamil, and instructed the low-caste Paravans of the southeast coast, a fisher caste of at least 10,000 persons who had turned to the Portuguese for protection and had accepted Christianity. This imaginative European painting shows St. Francis Xavier converting Hindus who are presumed to live in magnificent cities of European architecture. The liberal and intellectually curious Mughal Emperor Akbar invited several Jesuit fathers to his interfaith sessions in Fatehpur Sikri, along with Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, and Parsis. Parts of the Bible were translated into Persian, the language of the Mughal court. In 1577, Jesuits published the first printed book in India. Another Jesuit, the Italian Roberto de Nobili, arrived in Madurai in 1605 and established himself as a learned Brahmana from Rome, living the life of the traditional ascetic and observing caste rules. He learned Sanskrit and Tamil, translated Vedic texts into Latin, and converted numerous Brahmanas during his 50 years in India. A French Catholic missionary who took up Indian languages and customs with similar alacrity was the Abbé Dubois, who translated the Panchatantra from Sanskrit to French and left detailed accounts of Tamil religious life in the late 18th, early 19th centuries. Missionaries came from a dozen European countries. Some were paternalistic and domineering. Others identified with and served the less fortunate strata of society, as did this ascetic with blind and leper children. As in every other area of Christian expansion, a fusion of indigenous and imported religious expressions occurred. For example, the place of Mary, Mother of God, found a ready reception in Indian culture, where manifestations of the goddess have long been in the forefront of devotional Hinduism. The festivals of Mary, such as this one in contemporary South India, attract throngs of devotees and colorful lighting displays. Increasingly, in the modern period, missionary activity cultivated indigenous leadership. Today, the great majority of India's parish priests and members of religious orders are Indians. This high school in Maharashtra and these girls in a Kerala convent school are part of the extensive educational system of the Roman Church, with secondary schools, technical schools, university colleges, and seminaries throughout India. Numerous ashramas have been founded, such as this comfortable and spacious ashram with its deliberately Indian architectural features, located in a crowded area of a large city, and providing accommodations for worship, for individual retreat in study and meditation, and for various meetings and discussions, often of an interfaith nature. Patterns of worship range from masses conducted in simple village chapels to those in large, quite westernized churches, such as this cathedral in a modern city, with Mass in English and hymns sung from sheet music recently arrived from America. It is a Mass in which a European or American Catholic, or a high church Protestant for that matter, would feel entirely at home. The parishioners are educated and, for the most part, from upper income groups. This being a cathedral, there is the residence of a bishop next door, one of 120 bishops in India. Above these Indian bishops are two cardinals, both of them Indians. There are about 65 seminaries for the training of parish priests, priests who take vows of chastity and obedience and are ordained by the bishop of their diocese. And there are approximately 5,800 active priests today. In addition, there are priests in some 35 religious orders. We have mentioned the Jesuits and Dominicans, both established, with the Jesuits being particularly active in inner city missions and interfaith dialogues. There are also the Franciscans and the Benedictines, a contemplative order with a monastery in Bangalore district, and the Society of St. Francis of Sales and the Redemptorists. The monastic presence in India also includes nuns in several orders. Carmelite orders, the Daughters of the Cross, the Congregation of Jesus and Mary, and the Society of the Sacred Heart. In fact, one of the best known and most universally loved persons in India is Mother Teresa, a nun from the Missionaries of Charity Order who came from Skopje, Yugoslavia, in 1929. In the midst of Calcutta's incomparable slums, she established a home for dying destitutes, where she began to care for thousands of sufferers, nursing many of them back to life. She is still such a basic nurse for the dying, the leprous, the destitute today, rather much an Albert Schweitzer of India. And at the same time, she manages an order of 250 nuns with schools, clinics, orphanages, leprosy centers, and hospitals in 35 Indian cities. It is striking to witness the personal piety in the fusion here of Indian bhakti or devotional traditions with the Roman Catholic worship patterns. As was the case with the Syrian Christians and the Roman Catholic Christians, so it is with the third group of Christians to arrive in India, the Protestants. Their fortunes were closely bound with the tumultuous history, the political history of the time. The Protestants came with the tide of northern European empire builders, those competitive and aggressive builders of nations and empires who eliminated the 500-year Muslim domination of the multicultural subcontinent. The first Protestant missions were in 1706 in the Danish colonies on the southeast coast, where two German Lutheran missionaries organized churches and schools. The typically Protestant emphasis upon the Bible as the Word of God for all men brought the use of the vernacular Tamil and the translation and printing of texts. The most distinguished missionary of the 18th century was Christian Friedrich Schwarz, a Danish Lutheran who lived in Tamil Nadu for 48 years. The rapid expansion of British power in the late 18th century did not herald the immediate arrival of English missionaries, for the East India Company prohibited missionary activity until 1813, deciding that proselytizing would be unsound economic policy. Because of this ban, the English Baptist William Carey began work in a Danish colony in Bengal in 1793 and started a vernacular printing press, encouraging Bengali secular literature. He founded Serampur College in 1819 and was a man of incredible energy, translating the entire Bible into Bengali, Marathi, and Sanskrit, and parts of it, with the help of two colleagues, into 33 other languages. Reginald Haber, an Anglican missionary, historian, and hymn writer who eventually became Bishop of Calcutta, wrote valuable accounts of North Indian life in the 1820s. Another Anglican who became a bishop was Caldwell, who worked for 53 years as a missionary in Tamil Nadu, particularly among low-caste Shudra converts. In the 19th century, thousands of Protestant missionaries came from Europe and North America, responding to the impassioned calls of evangelists to take Christ to the heathen millions of India, as the phrase was then. They came to India, some of them pioneers in American territories who suddenly became pioneers in Indian wildernesses, with astonishing courage. They also came with astonishing naivete concerning the culture and especially the religions of the people they planned to save. They traveled by bullock carts and palanquins. They encountered famines that seemed endemic to the land and all the diseases known to man. In fact, 1/3 of them in the 19th century died of diseases. But they built churches, schools, orphanages, hospitals, medical schools, leprosy clinics, famine relief centers, and saw many of their institutions, especially in higher education, become the basic institutions of modern India. The basis of the Christian community lay in common worship, with the participation of all levels of the community in the vernacular prayers and hymn singing, such as these children reading the scriptures and the preaching of the Word of God, as this Methodist preacher is doing in a small chapel in central India. The fragmentation of the Protestants into numerous denominations proved to be an early embarrassment, and a division of territory by denominations was a 19th century solution. The Punjab, for example, was allotted to the Presbyterians, the Naga hill tribes of Assam to American Baptists, Maharashtra to the Congregationalists. But the 20th century has seen two important trends. One, a process of unification of denominations that began in 1908 and is still continuing, a unification into the Church of North India and the Church of South India. And second, there has been the trend, with more than a little prodding from state and national governments, to turn churches and institutions over to indigenous leadership and ownership. In other words, to phase out foreign involvement in both personnel and funding. This means that mid-20th century Protestant churches are calling more upon internal resources for both leadership and capital. From the operation of thousands of churches in villages, towns, and cities, to the staffing of colleges and theological seminaries and retreat and study centers, such as those in the foothills of the Himalayas, and of hospitals and village clinics formerly staffed by Westerners. The tasks have been devolving to Indian Christians themselves. This Methodist school in the northern city of Agra demonstrates the current rapprochement of government and church in an educational institution. Curriculum qualifications of the staff of 31 teachers, salaries, and the school calendar are all established by the state and national government. The school is really a dual operation, with English language the medium for those who choose, and Hindi the medium for others. Education is free up to the 5th grade, and then nominal fees are charged, with scholarship support available for the needy. The instruction is of high caliber, as the staff is all well qualified with certificates in education. These boys from poor families are permitted to sell the hand-loomed carpets and other crafts they make in the school shop in order to pay their tuition fees. Now, alongside the success and acknowledged worth of its educational and service institutions, the Christian communities of India, all of them, Syrian Christian, Roman Catholic, and Protestant, have had to come to terms with failure. Each of the three faiths has underestimated the strength of Hinduism and Islam as living religious expressions, and ultimately each has had to become reconciled to being a remnant Christian witness, scattered unevenly across the subcontinent. And each has failed to build a hold, a universal Christian community. The lack of a middle-class basis has been sorely felt. Converts from Brahmana and other high castes have retained advanced social standing, and converts from the untouchables, tribals, and other backward or depressed classes have retained the stigma of their low-caste origins. For the proponents of the gospel of universal love, this has not been an easy failure to admit. That Christianity in India has been dominated by Western forms and expressions is apparent, but we must also mention the specifically Indian contributions, such as those of Keshub Chandra Sen, a controversial figure of the mid-19th century Brahmo Samaj movement, whose theological articulations of his personal experiences of Christ were remarkable, or those expressions of the famous Maharashtrian poet Narayan Vaman Tilak, who became really a Christian bhakta in his experience of Christ as Guru, as Mother, or as celestial Ganga. Also, the Christian ashram system throughout India is a remarkable phenomenon with its stress upon renunciation, service, the Guru tradition, lay ministries, and worship services sometimes deliberately Sanskritized, as this combined Roman Catholic and Protestant Eucharist displays. There are opening bhajanas sung by all, purification rites, and the lighting of the lamp as the presence of Christ, readings from the Rig Veda as well as the New Testament, praises of God in traditional Sanskrit mantras, flowers and incense offered in puja fashion. Then the elements, the chapatis and local wine, are blessed by arati, the waving of the lamp, and circulated among the worshipers. Thus, in all of the wealth of historical detail, we must not lose sight of the central drama, participation in this transformation of God to man, the reaching down of the transcendent to the immanent, the change from death to life. For the Indian Christian, with his long and variegated religious heritage of cosmic sacrifice, reintegration, and transformation, experiences these in all of the nuances of his life.